What do you guys think of trigger warnings? That is what I'm going to talk about today, or specifically, actually, triggers. And I'm going to talk about how an individual who maybe is oversensitive can look at things that trigger them in a different way that is actually empowering. And then also, I'm going to speak against this tendency of society to go to the government to control people's actions. We really need to make a differentiation between governmental policy and what we want to encourage or discourage as a culture. I absolutely believe that social pressure can be a very useful tool, and as a libertarian, I believe that's basically the greatest tool for social change. I mean, obviously, as a Christian, God is the one who transforms people, but people will adhere to social norms, even if they do not take up the Christian faith. So, okay, first I'm going to talk about at an individual level, and I'm going to share basically the empowering way I used to think of triggers. And so I'm somebody who has dealt with depression. It's something I have to actively kind of fight against to not fall into this downward spiral. But anyway, I was in counseling for a couple of years, and during that time, my counselor would talk about triggers. But you know what? She talked about it in a very different way than the way feminism talks about triggers at this point. So the way she was using it is if you say that something triggered me, it's very different than saying this person made me feel that way, because then that makes it sound like that person has the ability to make you feel a certain way versus you have the power to frame it the way you need to frame it and deal with it accordingly and in a healthy response. However, it is helpful, though, to recognize what things tend to incite some of these negative feelings and emotions, or maybe what things tend to lead to you going down a negative path. For example, somebody who is an alcoholic is probably triggered by going to a bar. That brings up those feelings. It would be a particularly challenging situation, to overcome. So they need to recognize what are the environments, who are the people, what things, do people say or whatever. What are the circumstances that tend to trigger me going in a negative direction? And really, in a way, some things can trigger you in a positive direction. Like, if you go to a Tony Robbins conference, you'll probably be inspired, and that's a form of his influence. But we're particularly in this video focusing on triggering in a negative direction. And so anyway, that's really what it was for. And the idea was actually to take less power away from the circumstance or the other person or whatever, and put more power onto yourself to be able to adapt and deal accordingly. But you just need to be aware of what to expect, and then that can help you be more proactive in managing whatever challenge that you have. But then, of course, feminism likes to twist these things, and underlying it, of course, is the enemy. And what they tend to do is say, you triggered me. You did this. And so then they're putting it back on the triggerer, and you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't be allowed to say that because it makes me feel bad. And then unfortunately, feminism has a huge influence, huge power in the government, so that there are policies. I probably should have checked this, verified. Leave a comment if you know if this is true, or if you know what I'm referring to. But I believe in New York, people have actually already started getting fines for man-spreading. So, if a guy's on the subway and he's spreading his legs too much, people can get fined because it makes women uncomfortable. And this is ridiculous. Of course, the government with its force on monopoly has no business getting involved in these things that perhaps as a society we could try to encourage men to take up less space. But certainly as a Christian people, we should, be concerned with things that matter much more than that. And, it's just a crazy phenomena. What's going on, and it's really ironic how women seem to be able to make judgments on men about how they sit, what they think, how they talk, and somehow that's okay. But if a man wants to talk about abortion, for instance, then he's a man, so he can't talk. But women can know what it feels like to have balls. But anyway, that's sort of a different point. My point was really that feminism has a lot of governmental power, and that governmental power has no place in this discussion when it comes to triggers or making people feel uncomfortable. I think the only way that perhaps the government could be involved is if it's an active call to violence against somebody, because then that starts getting to actual threats and things like that could harm people physically, and actually physically, not you made me physically cry or you made me physically have my stomach upset when you said that about me, but like an actual like if you get hit by a baseball bat, that's a physical damage to you, and that is a proper role of government, whereas being the polite police is not a proper function of government. So anyway, so that's individually. People can look at things from a perspective of, okay, if something tends to lead to me feeling in a certain way, I need to figure out how to respond to that. Can I figure out how I am going to be capable of hearing different points of view without flipping out? Or am I going to then just avoid the different points of view? Or what am I going to do, and what would make me a better person and more productive in the world? And so that's how we can look at it individually. But then as a culture, I think we need to definitely be separating the government's role versus just society, and trying to use social pressure to help people act in a way that is kinder to other people. And so I think in this situation, it's not a terrible thing, especially in the Christian world, to try to be aware of that the words you speak affect other people. But we don't want to back down from truth. And this is the fine line, like I'm really going to be trying to walk in this channel to try to speak truth, but come at it from a place of love versus coming at it from a place of retaliation. And I do think I see this a lot with, because I try to, watch things about feminism and hear other points of views and whatnot. And there's a lot of times in the comment section, and I know YouTube, comments is not where people act their finest, but I think it is where they speak the truth more often. And I think a lot of times there is some of that retaliation, like women have treated men so poorly, so now I just want to lash out at women. But as Christians, whether you're a man or a woman, we both need to try to represent Christ, because ultimately that's what matters the most, and God knows injustices and trust in his sovereignty, and that he will deal with it accordingly. And it may not happen here on this earth, and it probably won't look just the way that we want it to look, but either way, have that trust in God and his sovereignty, so to kind of release some of that and to forgive, and remember that Jesus forgave when he was truly being wronged, right? People were saying horrible things about him. People were beating him, ultimately killed him, or, then he rose. But, like, Jesus was not this soft, I can't handle anything kind of person, and he dealt with it. And because he had his mindset on the eternal, so he didn't get totally flipped out if somebody said something that felt off to him. He knew when he was in this world, he was an alien to this world. Christians do not belong here. I mean, we belong here in that God has put us here and in this place at this time for a reason, to glorify him and to point people to him. But this is not our permanent spot. And we need to remember that and not be shocked at the things that go on in this world. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to bring up is, I actually totally forgot. I totally lost my train of thought. So I already talked about the government and social pressure and whatever. So actually maybe that's it. So leave a comment with your take on triggers, and or maybe something that triggers you. Because we all do get triggered, so I think we shouldn't totally just make fun of people for that, but recognize that emotional stability is a virtue. And actually, I'm also going to be making a video about emotional incontinence, and I believe these are very related, but I wanted specifically to talk about how to view triggers in a way that is actually, I think, is more empowering and more helpful. To say it is about me being aware of what leads me into a negative space versus trying to control what other people do, so that nobody ever puts me in an uncomfortable position, or nobody ever puts me in a position where I could potentially go in a downward direction. So yeah, so leave a comment if you like this kind of channel. Subscribe, share with your friends, especially women. Like, I'm hoping for some women to actually be watching me, and I'm hoping to share some of these ideas that are out there in the space of, conservatives, but say it in a way that maybe is a little more digestible, because I'm definitely somebody who's been affected by feminism, and I think a lot of negative tendencies in women has actually been encouraged in society. So that's just not a helpful coupling. So hoping to help break that down, so hopefully some women will be watching this. So I'll talk to you all later. Bye!